What is the core sin that drives all sin? And how could Adam and Eve, made in the image of God, sin? Wouldn't they have been made of good and only good? Well, today I have The Problem of Pain by C.S. Lewis. I'm going to read a little bit of it, and then we're going to talk about it. Adam had no temptation, in our sense, to choose the self. No passion or inclination inclining that way. Nothing but the bare fact that the self was himself. In order to provide free will, God gave Adam himself. And if you have self and God, then he is creating a risk that God has deemed worth it, but still a risk that there is a choice to choose between self and God. Up to that moment, the human spirit had been in full control of the human organism, but its authority over the organism was a delegated authority which it lost when it ceased to be God's delegate. Having cut itself off as far as it could from the source of its being, it had cut itself off from the source of power. For when we say of created things that A rules B, this must be that God rules B through A. God could have continued to rule the organism through the human spirit when the human spirit was in revolt against him, but he chose not to. Once the human spirit was in revolt of God, cutting God off, choosing self instead of God, the human spirit was severed from God and the ability to control the human body, the human organism. So God began to rule the organism in a more external way, not by the laws of spirit, but by those of nature. Thus, the organs no longer governed by man's will fell under the ordinary control of biochemical laws and suffered whatever the interworkings of those laws might bring about in way of pain, senility, and death. That's a bit of a complex read, but we're going to break it down. Yes, Adam and Eve were made in the image of God, but they were not God. So they cannot be perfect. So there is always the possibility of imperfection and sin. More importantly, Adam and Eve were given free will. Free will immediately gives them the choice. Why were they given free will if God knew it was going to lead to disaster? Because God wanted a loving relationship. And we all know that if you force love, if you dictate that they can only feel one way, if you create them to only love you and not be able to have any choice, that's not true love. And God knows that. So he gave us free will. And if they're made in God's image, then technically, wouldn't they be made of nothing but good? So how could they sin? With the ability to have free will and with the giving of self, Adam had himself. He in turn had the ability to choose self or God. This was a risk that God deemed worthy, but a risk nonetheless, that if given self, man now had the ability to choose self or God. And the sin that drives all sin is choosing self. And when people ask, how could the world be full of pain? How could the world have bad things? And the answer, as C.S. Lewis explains, is that when man chose God, they lived under the law of the Spirit, the law of God's Spirit. And the human spirit had authority over the human organism, the human body, through the law of the Spirit, the law of God's Spirit. But when man chooses self, when the human spirit chooses self, it severs that relationship and the power of the law of the Spirit and the power of God's Spirit. And they fall under the law of nature. And maybe there is a misconception that man felt that they would still be able to control the organism the same way. But by severing the relationship with God, choosing self over God, they can no longer live in the law of the Spirit, and they have to live in the law of nature. And all of the biochemical laws that come with nature, because nature is law and order, and all of the laws of biochemical breakdown comes with nature. Our body lives within the law of nature. Our minds live in the law of nature. But that relationship was given back to us, the opportunity to connect our mind back to the law of the Spirit. Through salvation, through the belief of Jesus, through faith in Jesus, our minds can live through the law of the Spirit and live eternally and live outside of the law of nature. But for now, our bodies cannot. So there is pain and suffering that comes with the flesh. Now, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for Christians living every day, trying to do their best? What that means is every single thing, every single lust, every single sense of anger, every single sinful nature that comes upon us, we know the why. Therapists say that if you truly want to understand your feelings, ask why 5 times. Why are you feeling this way? You explain that and then say why to that, why to that, and then you will find the true deeper why that is deep down in your mind and emotions, and then you'll be able to truly see the avenue of your problems. All Christians, all humans, we do not have to ask the why 5 times. We now know. Through the gospel, through the Bible, we know Through Genesis, we know the why is a choice of self over God. So whatever sin you're dealing with, whatever sin is your main kryptonite, and we all sin in many different ways, but each of us suffer in specific sins, sins that are our kryptonite, sins that Satan knows tempts us every time. In those battles, we may be struggling. We all are constantly struggling. I urge you to ask yourself, in whatever sin it is, how in this scenario am I choosing flesh? How in this scenario am I choosing self? If you can identify the selfish choice of self in this specific sin, you can begin rerouting it and choosing selfless behavior, choosing God. There are ways to inhibit addiction, lust, anger, hate. But if you truly want to cleanse yourself of it, if you want to erase its hold on you, you have to see where you're choosing self and identify and understand and accept that you're choosing self and figure out how in that sin, in those actions, you can choose God instead. We are in bodies that succumb to the biochemical laws of nature. We are constantly being drawn by flesh in one direction, while our mind and our soul works diligently to be pulled into a different direction. But what we know to be true, no matter how hard it seems to be, no matter how false this sounds, it is the truth. The mind and soul are more powerful than the flesh. Because through the soul, we can connect to Jesus, and through God, all is possible. I encourage you all to keep trying, to keep doing your best, to understand that you make mistakes, have forgiveness on yourself and others, as we are all sinners. Wake up each day trying to leave the mark of a disciple so everyone knows those are followers of Christ by loving yourself and loving others. Not praising yourself, not idolizing yourself. Give yourself the love you deserve and give others the love they deserve. But above all, put all your love and authority in God. Go out there and live your faith out loud.